If you're a horror movie fan, you probably know the feeling of comfort that comes with watching a traditional horror film. You know the kind, straightforward plots, relatable characters, and plenty of scares. These films often act as a kind of comfort food for horror fans. When it comes to more experimental horror, the results can be hit or miss. Take this year, for example. In 2024 alone, there's been a slew of films that explored different subgenres with refreshing creativity. In A Violent Nature took an interesting spin on slasher tropes. Bramagam delved into casteism and classism with an impressive monochrome aesthetic, and Oddity explored revenge in a hauntingly compelling way. Even Outside used zombies to explore themes of patriarchy, and it got well-deserved recognition for doing so. But then there's Black Cab. This latest offering, directed by Bruce Goodison and written by David Michael Emerson, Nick Frost, and Virginia Gilbert, unfortunately falls into the muddled category. It's one of those films that seems to have a good concept at its core, but struggles to execute it in a way that resonates. Let's talk about the opening. We meet Anne, her fiancé Patrick, and their friends, Ryan and Jessica, wrapping up a night at a restaurant. Patrick begins by telling a spooky story about a cab driver, but then drops the news that he and are finally getting married after a rough patch in their relationship. This announcement doesn't sit well with Anne or Jessica, and the evening ends on a sour note. Despite the tension, Patrick pushes Anne into a cab, insisting that they head home. But instead of going to Anne's place, Patrick orders the driver, Ian, to drive aimlessly until he decides otherwise. The tension between the couple is palpable, and though Ian senses something's off and tries to check on Anne, Patrick's rude behavior and Anne's meekness keep him at bay. It's only after a pit stop that Ian's true nature starts to reveal itself, and things quickly spiral into danger. Now, there's an interesting premise here, trapped in a cab with a volatile driver. It's the kind of tight setting that, when executed right, could heighten tension and create a gripping experience. But Black Cab doesn't really live up to that potential. The story tries to tackle heavy themes like relationships, infidelity, parenthood, and personal autonomy. But the real problem with this movie is that it doesn't know what it's trying to say. Is it a statement on relationships and loyalty? Is it about abortion or a woman's right to choose? Is it a psychological exploration of a man's insecurities? Or is it simply a twisted horror movie about a killer cabbie haunted by his past? Honestly, it's hard to say. And the film doesn't really help clarify anything. By the time the plot finally tries to explain itself in an overexplained, exposition-heavy ending, you're left feeling frustrated instead of enlightened. As for the setting, Black Cab takes place almost entirely inside the titular vehicle. This kind of confinement has been used in other films, Cold Meat, Wheelman, Cosmopolis, Locke, with varying degrees of success. The idea is intriguing, but Goodison doesn't fully capitalize on it. Cinematographer Adam Etherington attempts to frame Nick Frost in creative ways, but the camera work doesn't do much to elevate the tension or the performance. It just makes Frost look like a generic villain, and honestly, it undermines his talents. Frost, known for his comedic chops in the Cornetto trilogy, does his best in this role, playing Ian as a dangerous figure hiding behind a facade of gentleness. But the character itself is so one-dimensional that it's hard for Frost to really stretch his legs as an actor. As for the rest of the cast, they're not given much to work with either. Sinead Carlson, who impressed in Last Night in Soho, has a starring role here, but her character is stuck repeating the same few actions over and over again, leaving the audience tired of her plight. Luke Norris plays Patrick, and while he manages to convey Patrick's obnoxious nature in his brief moments on screen, his character never truly evolves. The supporting cast, including Tessa Parr and George Bakari, do what they can with their roles, but none of the characters leave a lasting impact. And Tilly Woodward's portrayal of a ghost doesn't quite add the haunting presence you'd hope for. But it's not just the performances that falter. The film's attempt to build tension falls flat. Goodison's direction relies too much on the question of whether Anne will escape or not, but it quickly becomes repetitive. The pacing drags, and the film's attempt to evoke suspense comes off as unimaginative. The movie doesn't take full advantage of its confined setting to create real dread. And, to make matters worse, the visual effects are underwhelming. The ghosts and apparitions that are supposed to add to the horror don't feel substantial. They seem more like afterthoughts than integral parts of the story. With such weak execution, it's hard to overlook the lack of impact these supernatural elements have. The music, though, does have its moments. The pulsating beats, while not groundbreaking, at least give you something to groove to, if not to fear. But when a film's soundtrack is one of its more memorable elements, you know something's gone awry. As much as I was hoping for a standout performance from Nick Frost, Black Cab simply doesn't give him the material he deserves. Frost has tried to branch out into darker, more complex roles, and he has the talent to pull it off. Sadly, this is a film that fails to make the most of his skills. Had the project been in the hands of a more capable director and writer, Black Cab could have been a standout film. Instead, it leaves me remembering it as a missed opportunity, a film where Nick Frost was let down by poor direction and an unclear narrative. And, speaking of Cornetto trilogy nostalgia, it's hard not to wish for a reunion. Nick Frost, Simon Pegg, and Edgar Wright have all gone their separate ways and achieved great things. Pegg's a recognizable face in big franchises like Mission, Impossible, and The Boys, while Wright has accumulated accolades and awards for his work. But wouldn't it be great to see them back together, perhaps with a darker, more mature take on their earlier collaborations? Not necessarily a sequel, but something that reflects their growth as artists. Is that too much to ask for? In the end, Black Cab feels like a missed chance to explore something deeper. It may work for some, but for me, it just didn't click. If you're a fan of Frost or claustrophobic horror, it might be worth a watch, but don't expect it to be as memorable as the other horror films that are pushing boundaries this year.